Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S MindLab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder what it takes to become a psychedelic therapist? It sounds pretty cutting edge, right? Well, a new paper dives deep into the journey of becoming one of these unique healers, looking at how their entire professional identity might shift. Think about it, psychedelic-assisted therapy, or PAT, is becoming a real thing, moving out of labs and into actual treatment. But we're still figuring out how therapists get ready for this. It is not just about learning new techniques. It is about a much deeper personal and professional transformation. This paper asks, what does it really mean to become a psychedelic therapist? How does that happen? And what helps it along the way? They use this idea called professional identity formation, or PF, which is basically how someone comes to see themselves as a professional. Like a doctor or a therapist, it's all about how they think, feel, and act in their role. This research suggests that becoming a psychedelic therapist might push the boundaries of our usual understanding of professional identity. These therapists often aren't beginners. They're usually already experienced clinicians. They're stepping into a field that is still figuring itself out, with lots of different ideas and traditions coming together. Plus, the very nature of psychedelic experiences might actually change the therapist's perspective on their own development. So PIF might need to be expanded to understand how people form their professional selves when both the job itself and the person doing the reflecting are in flux. So what is so different about being a psychedelic therapist? The paper highlights 3 key areas where the demands are really concentrated. First, there's what they call restrained presence. Imagine you are in a session, and the therapist needs to be there for you, to be trusted and safe, but not so much that they get in the way of your own unfolding experience. It is a delicate balance. In many traditional therapies, therapists are trained to be more active, offering interpretations or insights. But in PAT, often the default is to hold back, to witness, and only to intervene precisely when it is needed. This can be a real shift for experienced therapists who are used to a more direct approach. They might need to actively unlearn habits that are considered good practice elsewhere. Second, psychedelic therapy often brings up material that standard training doesn't always prepare therapists for. We're talking about profound personal experiences that might feel mystical, spiritual, or life-changing. Therapists need to be able to work with this deeply personal and sometimes spiritual material without imposing their own beliefs or trying to explain it away too quickly. This means they need to have thought about their own stance on big questions about consciousness, healing, and spirituality. It's about staying clinically useful even when the patient's experience goes beyond the usual ways of understanding things. Third, psychedelic therapy often involves co-therapy, meaning 2 therapists working together with one patient. This isn't just about dividing tasks. Research suggests that the therapist pair is actually part of the therapeutic experience for the patient. How the co-therapists work together, their shared perspective, and how they handle any differences can really shape the process. So, it is not just about each individual therapist being good. It is about them developing a shared way of working that feels solid and reliable to the person they're helping. The paper then points out some gaps in how we're currently preparing these therapists. While there are guidelines on who can practice, there is less understanding of how therapists actually develop into this role. They talk about how different competency frameworks exist, some focusing on more gentle qualities, while others are more evidence-based and scientific. But neither really explains the journey from being an established therapist to becoming a PAT therapist. It's like knowing where you want to end up, but not having a map for how to get there. One big gap is how therapists' past training influences their future practice in PAT. Existing training gives them skills, but also habits of thinking and behaving. The question is, what if that prior training helps them in PAT? What might actually get in the way, and what needs to be changed or adapted? It is not just adding new skills, but reshaping what they already know and do. Another interesting point is the role of personal experience, especially with psychedelics in a therapist's journey. This personal experience is often really valued, maybe even sought after, but it is not always formally taught or discussed. The paper highlights that just having an experience doesn't automatically make it a clinical asset. It needs to be thoughtfully reflected upon and integrated from the perspective of a therapist, not just held as a personal memory. The way someone has an experience, like their intentions and support during it, also matters for how it can later inform their practice. And then there is the training itself. While training is seen as necessary, its developmental impact isn't always clear. Most programs provide knowledge and skills, but it is not always clear how they help therapists actually transform and inhabit the new role. Some key questions remain. What does the training actually change in a therapist? What developmental work is left to the trainee to do on their own? Even when programs include supervised psychedelic experiences for trainees, the outcomes aren't always well documented. This is where the idea of professional identity formation, or PF, really comes in handy. PIF looks at who a therapist is as a person connects with who they are as a professional. It's about how their personal history, values, mentors, peers, and the training structures all shape them as they navigate changes and grow in their role. The paper presents a helpful diagram representing this. It's not a rigid step-by-step guide, but more like a way to think about the different parts that contribute to a therapist's development in PAT. It considers what therapists bring in, how they rework that through their experiences in PAT, and how they eventually come to embody the role. Field and structural contexts are also considered important throughout this process. A key idea is that experienced therapists aren't starting from scratch. They have a pretty settled professional identity. PAT might disrupt this settled self, asking for forms of presence or openness that feel foreign. The challenge becomes one of reorganization, not just adding new things. This dissonance or feeling of being out of sync can actually be a good thing, prompting growth and adaptation. Then there is the idea of belonging. Professional identity is often built through recognition and being part of a community. But in the world of PAT, there isn't one single clear community. There are different groups like those in clinical trials, traditional psychotherapy settings, or even more spiritual or traditional groups. Each has its own ideas about what is important, how healing works, and who is qualified. This means belonging can be a more complex and ongoing process for these therapists. The paper also revisits personal experience, but with a new twist. Scrollsome psychedelic experiences may complicate this assumption, drawing on Paul's 2015 account of transformative experience. Jacobs 2023 and Karger and Schenberg 2026 argue that some psychedelic experiences may be transformative in two senses. Per M. Omensi here is where it gets really interesting. Some psychedelic experiences might not just be disruptive moments that can be reflected on later from a stable viewpoint. They might be transformative in a deeper way, changing the very lens through which a person sees the world. This means the therapist reflecting on the experience might already be a different person than the one who initially had the experience. This creates a unique challenge for understanding how they integrate that experience into their professional identity. It's less about working through something from a fixed point and more about recognizing that the path of development has already shifted. So, what is next? The paper proposes a research agenda to explore these complex questions. They suggest research focusing on how established therapists reorganize their existing professional selves, how personal experiences become clinically useful, the precise developmental role of training, how therapists navigate belonging across different communities, and importantly, how co-therapy pairs develop a shared clinical stand. First, we need to understand how therapists' existing training and habits are reshaped for PAT. It is about pinpointing what elements transfer easily, what become obstacles, and what needs active revision. Longitudinal studies following therapists over time as they transition would be super valuable here. Second, the focus needs to be on how personal experiences, including psychedelic ones, are integrated into clinical judgment, rather than just being personal convictions. The paper stresses that the context of the experience and the opportunities for reflection are key. It also highlights the challenge of studying experiences that might alter the very reflective standpoint of the therapist. Third, we need to dig deeper into what PAT training actually does developmentally. Does it just authorize entry, or does it truly cultivate deeper capacities and shift therapeutic stances? Research should evaluate what training changes and what developmental work is left to the trainee. Fourth, research should explore how therapists find their place across the diverse and sometimes conflicting communities within PAT. How do they gain legitimacy and a sense of belonging, and how do these affiliations shape their development? And finally, the paper emphasizes the importance of studying the therapist dyad. How do pairs form, cohere, and develop a shared clinical approach? This involves looking at how individual differences and participant reactions contribute to the dyad's formation as a unit. In essence, this paper argues that becoming a psychedelic therapist is not just about acquiring a new set of skills or qualifications. It is a profound journey of professional identity formation. It's about how they come to be psychedelic therapists as individuals, as members of pairs, and as part of a field that is still discovering its own identity. So, what's my take on all this? This research is really important because it's getting ahead of the curve. PAT is a growing field, and understanding the human element, the development of the therapists themselves, is crucial for safe and effective practice. They've done a great job of framing the challenges using PIF theory, which helps us see that it's more than just technical training. One of the biggest strengths is how they acknowledge the complexity of established therapists transitioning into this role. It's not a simple add-on, it requires significant personal and professional reorientation. The discussion about personal experience also really resonates. It highlights that the inner journey of the therapist matters, but it needs to be thoughtfully integrated, not just assumed to be beneficial. However, as the paper itself points out, the research is still in its early stages. We need more empirical studies to really understand these developmental pathways. For instance, more longitudinal studies tracing therapists over time would be incredibly valuable. We also need to see more research into the effectiveness of different training models, especially when it comes to fostering those deeper relational and existential capacities specific to PAT. The implications for practice are huge. It suggests that training programs need to go beyond just teaching techniques and focus on supporting the therapist's own professional identity development. This might involve more emphasis on self-reflection, working with personal experiences, and developing co-therapy skills. This research opens up so many avenues for future exploration, especially in understanding how profound personal experiences can shape professional identity without compromising objectivity or ethical practice. It's a fascinating glimpse into the making of a new kind of healer. What do you think about the journey to becoming a psychedelic therapist? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S MindLab for more deep dives into the fascinating world of psychology. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.